Hi friends, Fina here from SciFi Reads. Welcome back to my channel. Today with my November TBR while I'm eating hair here, so that's going to happen today. And I had a really interesting reading month. I've read a couple of books that I usually don't read, like types of books that I usually don't read. And I'm really excited to talk with you about them because I have thoughts and, I need to talk with someone about some of these books. So yeah, you're my victims right now. Deal with it. But before we dive into the November reads, as always, I want to talk about the stats real quick in numbers. What did my November look like? In November, I read a total of 7 books, one of which is a DNF, and 2 books that I started, with a total of 2,787 pages. 2 fantasy, the 2 started ones are also fantasy, 2 sci-fi, and then 3 mostly horror, I think, a little bit thriller in there. I don't know. I'll tell you about them when I'm at the books. And then just 1 audio this month, just 1 ebook this month, and the rest was physical, which is more than usual. That's good. It means that I'm reading from my physical TBR. That is way too big anyway, and that needs to be read. One of the topics for my 2025 goals video later. And then I had 2 3-star reads, 3 4-star reads, and 1 5-star read. Okay, let's just go over the books. I'm separating them by genre again. In the fantasy section, I am going to start with my DNF, just so we get it out of the way. And unfortunately, that's the Ringsworn trilogy. I read half of book number 2, but I'm DNFing the entire series as well. I really wanted to love this. I really wanted to love this fantasy series. It has all the elements that I love about fantasy. It has a really good idea. It has a really good premise. The magic system is incredibly interesting and unique. It has just a lot of really cool stuff. I just didn't click with it. I had the same problem already with book 1, but I kind of fought my way through. Book 2 continued to be a very plot-driven book, and I'm a very character-driven reader. I need some character development. I need some character motivation, and I didn't get much of this. It was a whole lot of wandering around of the different groups that you're following in the book, and halfway through, I dreaded picking up the book, really. I'm sorry, I gave it a try. I mean, I read half of the series, if you want, and I just didn't click with it. That's why I'm just deciding now to not continuing further. Next up in the fantasy genre, a book that could also be described as women lit fic, because technically that's what it is. It's just set in a paranormal setting, and that's Rachel Harrison's Cackle, a new favorite author of mine, I think. I mean, I've read 2 books of her now. I really enjoyed them. I have a 3rd book of hers on my December TBR if my library hold comes through. If not, it's going to be January, but for soon. In Cackle in particular, it's about a young woman who just comes out of a really shitty relationship and moves into a small town because she got a job there as a teacher, and the small town vibe is actually what I really loved about this book. It's very Stars Hollow Gilmore Girls like, and which is a favorite TV show of mine. So that's what I already loved about it. All very friendly. You have cakes and farmers market and that kind of stuff. And I just loved the scenery. And then she meets another woman that helps her get over what's going on. She's obviously sad and depressed, and that other woman helps her get over it. And it turns out that other woman is a witch and has kind of the town in her spell and whatnot. And it's really interesting to follow along the general happenings and how she is solving her issue. Nothing deep, nothing groundbreaking or anything, but the way she translated the ideas was just well done. Moving into the sci-fi genre, and we're starting with a ginormous surprise. I did not think I would like this book as much as I ended up liking it, and that is The Other Valley by, I'm blanking on the author. It is right here. Ta-da! Howard something. When I read the description, I actually thought it's more a literary book, which it still is. The way I read it, I experienced it more as a sci-fi novel with a time travel trope. And I have a little bit more detail about it in a mini review that I did just recently, so I'll leave the link down below if you want to get a little bit more deeper detail into what I was thinking about the story. It is about a valley that sits between other valleys. So if you go to the east or to the west, you end up in the same valley, just 20 years in the past or 20 years in the future. And everybody knows about it. And just that concept I thought was so interesting and he actually used it in such an interesting way throughout the book that, yeah, I just ended up loving it. Plus, the audiobook is really well done. It was really easy for me to listen to. What I have to say, though, I watched, because I didn't know that that was happening, but at the same time, there was a reading club over at Talking Story. John and his wife, they did their book club read for November, and I listened to their conversation with the author afterwards, and there were a lot of things that went right over my head. I didn't even remember experiencing it that way, or I didn't even think about it that way. So there is a much deeper philosophical aspect to this book, hence probably why it is literary. Again, it went completely over my head. I just loved it for the story and how that time travel aspect was handled. I really enjoyed the main character that we followed throughout the story. That was my favorite book of the month, definitely. I don't even know how I heard about this book. I would love to figure out why this even ended up on my library hold list and why I even ended up picking it up. Because if I would have seen it in a bookstore, I would have in a million years never picked it up. So somehow, and I forgot how, unfortunately, it got onto my radar. I'm glad it did. Whatever, made that decision for me. I love it. And I'm super grateful for having read this book. A totally different sci-fi book. I mean, there are worlds between these two sci-fi books. Is The Last Lumenian by S.G. Blaze. This is a book that I heard about at WonderCon, again, 1 or 2 years ago. I'm not 100% sure anymore. The author was at the booth and she was giving away her book to people who passed by, including bookmarks and whatnot. So I even have a fitting bookmark for the book. I got it signed too, if it wants to open up. Yep, so I got it signed too by the author. And then I started reading it shortly after I received it because, I wanted to give it a try and then scream about it in the internet void. Well, I was not in the mood at that point for a book like this, but I picked this up now because of my TBR game for November. This was the second prompt, which was Second Chances. And boy, am I glad that I finally read this. This is a more young adult, new adult sci fantasy story with a little bit of romance in it. We have a princess who doesn't like how her father runs the country, so she is joining the rebels and adventure ensues. And obviously, if you've ever read a young adult or new adult book like that, there's a lot of stuff happening, drama and stuff like that. If you liked Fourth Wing, I could see you liking this one too. It has the same quirkiness, the same entertainment level, the same easy readiness. Is that a word? It is easily readable is what I want to say, similar to Fourth Wing. And yes, I liked Fourth Wing. I enjoyed the first two books. I'm excited for the third book coming out and I will read it. I think they are fun, they are quirky, they are very entertaining. 15-year-old me would have squeaked all the time reading these. I mean, they're a bit cheesy, yes, but I love them. It's just fun. It's just fun entertainment. That's really what it is. And that's what this is as well. So I'm really excited to continue the series, especially since compared to Fourth Wing, this is a very fast read, a lot shorter, and yeah, just a blast. It is so much fun. Moving into the horror genre, the first one is Good Girls Don't Die. This was the Thrill Chill Kill book club pick over at the Bookish Drama Discord. I actually didn't want to read it, but then I felt like I needed something else than fantasy, so I just grabbed it from my library. It was available, so I read it. And I should have just not. It was meh. I mean, it was not super terrible, but it was not great either. So first of all, this is a book about 3 women that get kidnapped and they wake up in situations that are completely unreal. And they're like, what the hell is happening here? And how do I get out of this? And it's told in 3 parts. So 1 part for every woman that got missing, and you get each of the women's story one at a time. The first one was great. And the second and third one were basically repetition of the first one. So at that point, you realized, okay, there's something bigger going on. Can we just get to the end? And then the end was just so overdone and so ridiculous that I was just sitting there. I was like, okay, that was not worth it. So the next book was another one of those interesting books that I probably would have not picked up if I would have just stood in the bookstore and seen the cover and read the description, because it's not typically a type of book that I lean towards. And that is The Reformatory by Tananarive. It's kind of a historical fiction / horror book. And just to get the glare out of the way, I'm sorry, I wrapped it in Mylar. This book I saw on Ian the Reader's channel. He recommended it during one of his recent videos. And I thought, you know what? This actually, especially the horror aspect of what Ian was describing, sounded really interesting to me. It has aspects that I completely loved, and it has aspects that I didn't vibe with. So first of all, this is 1950s Florida. You're following Robert and Gloria, who are brother and sister. He is 12, she is 17. Their father ran away because he was trying to unionize the slaves, and that obviously didn't go over well back then in Florida. So he had to flee, and he left his kids basically alone. And the sister kind of took on the mother role, so she's taking care of the younger brother, making sure he goes to school, all those kind of things. And one day on their way to school, they get stopped by the son of one of the farm owners, and the son is hitting on the sister. And the brother doesn't like that. He's like, "What are you doing?" And is basically going in between and ends up kicking the boy, which then leads him to go in front of the judge, and the judge sentences him to 6 months at the Reformatory, which is kind of like a school for boys, but everybody knows it's essentially a prison. And you get two POVs, one of the brother at the Reformatory and one of the sister trying to get him out. What I loved about this is in particular the brother's POV, and that's where the horror element comes in. In the Reformatory, they say that there are ghosts roaming around, and he is receptive to that, so he can see those ghosts. So it has a lot of really cool, unsettling, eerie moments, but also in a very entertaining manner and not scary. So not in a, oh my god, I want to hide behind a pillow and actually not see what's going on type of way, because that's not for me. I thought it was very interestingly handled on how these ghosts are incorporated and how he engages with them. The other part that I really enjoyed were in Gloria's POV, because that's where the historical part comes in, since she is wandering around and trying to meet with people that can hopefully help her get her brother out of the Reformatory. You learn a lot about how life was back then. And that was unsettling on a whole different level. So of course, you kind of know what happened back then, right? Due to history lessons in school or documentaries or just people generally talking about it. But this book makes you live it. And I don't think I ever had a situation where I read a book where I just felt violently ill about how someone is treated in a book. And that was normal life back then. And I was just sitting there and I couldn't believe that this is how people were treated. I mean, we're all humans. The skin color doesn't matter. We're all people. And it was just so unsettling for me in that moment that I read it but it was a hard read. So having said that, there are also things in the book that I didn't like as much. On the brother side in particular, one thing that I don't like about books is when you're emotionally manipulated. And she does that with the brother and the warden. We know he's evil. We know how he treats the children. It is very obvious from the first time you meet this person that he is the villain. And it's fine for the most part of the book. But towards the end of it, she is adding, oh, he also does this, and he also does this, and he also does this. Of course, because you know this is what this dude does, you can only hate him, but it felt so unnecessary. I already hated him before. I already was aware that he was evil. You didn't have to add all of these extreme other things on top of it just to make me push my emotion further into that direction. I didn't think it added to the book, and it actually made it worse for me because I don't like when books do that. Like the Kite Runner does the same thing, and I hated the book because of that. The other thing, and that's more a smaller part, is Gloria as a character was not believable for me. She was 17, but she acted more like a 12-year-old, and Robert was 12, and he acted more like the 17-year-old. So that kind of didn't work for me, but I'm so glad I read this book. I'm excited that I got to experience it. I'm glad it made me uncomfortable because I think that's important to understand, just, history and what happened. If you are into those types of stories, I highly recommend you read this. The next book was a buddy read with Ian the Reader, and I'm very excited that I had someone to buddy read this with. The book is The Fireman by Joe Hill. This was my first Joe Hill read, and thanks to Andrew over at Andrew's Recently Reads, he got me all hyped up about reading Joe Hill eventually, and I decided to go with this one. This is about a pandemic. And the particular piece of the pandemic is that spores kind of nest into the human body, and it leads to the human combusting in flames at one point. Very amazing visual also on page on how that is happening. Very unsettling too. We are following a young woman who is a nurse, and at the beginning of the pandemic she helps in the hospital make those people more comfortable, helps enforce all of those rules, yada yada yada, till at one point she also gets the scales. That's what they are called. The dragon scales is what this sickness is called. So she gets that too at one point, and she actually had a pact with her husband that if one or both of them get sick, that they then kill themselves. Turns out, though, she is pregnant now and she doesn't want to kill herself anymore. She wants to get this pregnancy to term and continue her life till then, and ideally survive till then, which the husband does not like at all. He is a piece of work, I tell you. And she then flees from him and ends up in a kind of camp where similar people like her, people with the scales, not pregnant people, people with the scales, are also just there to survive. And there are some interesting things happening in the camp that also impact then her and her life. I don't want to say too much because it gets into spoiler territory, because now we are already kind of a couple of pages in. What I found very interesting was that he is the son of Stephen King, right? You can tell. There are so many things that are so familiar, if you've read a couple of Stephen King books, that are so familiar to how they are telling stories. So you can definitely see that he learned a thing or two from his father. And also, it reminded me a little bit of Under the Dome when it comes to like close proximity and how humans react if there is no way out, and what that does to the companionship part of the people and whatnot. It's definitely too long. It definitely has a bunch of moments in there where it's like, you could have cut that out and made this 800-page chunker, which is very long winding at times, made it a little bit more compact and then paced a little better, because the pacing is definitely off in this one. The other thing that bugged me, there were a lot of situations that are just so incredibly unlikely that they would never happen in real world. I mean, obviously it's not a real world situation. I sure hope not. There were just things where people all of a sudden were there, and you're like, how did you even get there? How did you even know that the other person was there and that you had to be there at that exact moment? So a lot of situations that, added surprises where you're like, but why? Like, this doesn't even make sense. But what I liked about it was that roller coaster ride. Over the 800 pages, a lot is happening to the main characters. There are so many situations where you're like, oh, finally a break for them. Finally a break for them. And then something derails that break in the worst ways possible. And you're like, nah, no, how is this happening? Till the end, I'm telling you, till the end. It was at a point where I was just like sitting up in my chair, was like, what? It was good. It kept me glued to the pages for 800 frickin' pages, and that is not an easy thing to achieve with all the things that were happening here. All right, that's all I read in November. What were your November books? What was your favorite book that you read in the month of November? Let me know down in the comments. And then, of course, if you like this type of content and the type of books that I read and want to hear more about that, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And then don't forget to check out a couple more videos of mine if you want to, just see more videos of mine. And with that, there's nothing more to say then. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and then I'll see you soon with my next video. Bye!